My name is Sophia, and I never saw it coming. I pulled into the gravel driveway of our old farmhouse just after dusk, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the kind of smell you used to trust. But that night felt different, like the wind was whispering warnings I'd ignored. I parked the car and killed the engine, letting the sudden silence swallow me. My boots crunched across the porch as I stepped inside, expecting Mom's soft humming or Emma's laughter. Instead, I found a hush so heavy it felt alive. In the living room, a single lamp glowed like a candle in the dark. My mother stood by the window, her back to me, shoulders trembling. Emma sat on the edge of the couch, gripping a small velvet box so tight her knuckles were white. My heart thudded against my ribs, a painful reminder that something was terribly wrong. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. "Hey," I said, voice small. They jumped. Mom turned first, eyes red-rimmed and glossy. Emma swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the box. I crossed the room slowly, each step heavy with dread. When I reached them, the box seemed to pulse under Emma's fingers. "What is that?" I asked, though a sick part of me already knew. Emma's head stayed bowed. Mom moved toward me, but hesitated, as if she couldn't trust her own feet. I forced myself to breathe. "Emma?" I said. Her fingers shook as she opened the box, revealing empty velvet lining. My breath caught. "You sold it," I whispered. The words tasted like ash. Emma lifted her head, tears brimming. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "We had no choice." Her voice cracked, and Mom's shoulders sagged. "Your grandma, her treatments," Mom said, voice rough. "They cost more than we thought." I stared at them, stunned. The box in my hands felt like a cruel joke. It had held Grandma's sapphire brooch, our family's legacy passed down through generations. That small piece of silver and stone had been our history, our bond. And now it was gone. I sank onto the armchair, the worn fabric rough under my palms. My chest tightened, and my mouth went dry. "You what?" I managed. My voice shook, as if it might break in two. Emma's tears spilled over, trailing down her cheeks. Mom's eyes filled, but she didn't look at me. I pressed my hands into my lap until my nails bit into my skin, grounding me. Images flashed through my mind, Grandma pinning the brooch to her coat that Christmas morning, her laugh warm and bright. Mom cradling me in her arms, the brooch glinting in the lamplight. Emma dancing in the backyard, that same piece pinned to her dress. All those memories felt tainted now, like snapshots in a fairy tale I no longer believed. My jaw clenched so hard I could feel the ache behind my cheekbones. My body trembled, not with cold but with something darker, like betrayal had seeped into my bones. I stood, the chair scraping behind me, and backed away toward the hallway. The lamp's glow followed me, shadows stretching long and accusing. Mom took a hesitant step after me. "Sophia, please," she pleaded. Her voice quivered, raw. "We thought." "You thought?" I interrupted, voice sharp as broken glass. "You thought you could decide for me?" I swallowed against the lump in my throat, the question burning hotter than any anger. Emma rose, stepping toward me, tears still falling. But I held up a hand, as if to block them both out, to keep their apologies from touching me. I braced myself against the hallway wall, palms splayed, my breath ragged. "That brooch was more than jewelry," I said, voice low. "It was our story." The words felt hollow, echoing in the empty hall. I closed my eyes, the memory of its weight in my palm flashing behind my lids. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to look at them again. Their faces were mirrors of regret and fear, and for a moment I saw the love that used to hold us together. But the space between us felt vast, a chasm carved by their secret. My heart twisted, caught between grief for a history stolen and rage at the women I'd trusted most. I turned and walked away, each step echoing through the house. Behind me, I heard Emma's sob, quiet and broken. My shoulders burned with unshed tears, but I kept moving. Down the hallway, I reached my room, the one Grandma used to read bedtime stories in, her brooch always pinning her cardigan closed. Now the room felt hollow, like I'd stepped into a memory dressed in morning clothes. I closed the door softly and leaned against it, pressing my forehead to the cool wood. My heart hammered, and tears slipped free at last. I slid down until I sat on the floor, knees curled to my chest. The hush outside was relentless, and I realized the night had crept in fully, shadows pooling in every corner of the house. In that moment, I felt something stir, quiet, fierce. A promise would get it back. Not just the brooch, but my sense of self, my trust, my history. I wasn't sure how yet. But I knew one thing for certain, the river of our family's story had shifted, and I was about to dive into currents I couldn't see. That morning I woke to the low hum of summer heat slipping through my cracked bedroom window. My head throbbed, each heartbeat a reminder that nothing would ever be the same. I sat up on the edge of the mattress, its springs sighing under my weight, and ran a hand through tangled hair. The velvet-lined box felt heavier in my pocket than I remembered, as though gravity itself had decided to remind me of its presence. I crossed the room in bare feet and paused at the dresser mirror, studying my reflection. My eyes looked haunted, dark circles carved by sleepless nights and a betrayal too deep to ignore. My jaw ached, too tight from grinding teeth in a half-conscious rage. I swallowed, tasting metal on my tongue, and reached into my pocket to remind myself that the brooch was real in its absence. I dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, each fabric feeling scratchy against my skin, evidence that I was unprepared for this journey. The house was silent except for the distant whir of the refrigerator and a lone cricket's song outside. I stepped into the hallway and heard faint voices, Mom's soft weeping and Emma's shaky attempt at comfort. I paused, hand on the doorframe, heart twisting into knots. Part of me ached to stay, to cradle them through their guilt. But another part, the part that had stained my soul with anger, urged me forward. I slipped outside, the porch boards cool underfoot. Dawn's first light cast long shadows across the yard, turning the overgrown grass into rivers of gold. I inhaled, the stale scent of summer dew filling my lungs. Every breath felt like swallowing betrayal, but I breathed anyway. I climbed into my car, settling behind the wheel as if into a command post, and felt the brooch press against my hip, a lodestone pulling me toward what I had to do next. The drive into town was a blur of green fields and empty highways. I kept the windows down despite the heat, letting wind whip my hair and sting my cheeks. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the wheel, mind racing through possibilities. Where had they sold it? Who was involved? How could I trace their steps without risking exposure? The questions churned in my gut, a knot of confusion and determination. I remembered the crumpled receipt I'd glimpsed once under Emma's coffee mug, a jewelry buyer's name scrawled in sloppy script. I pounded my fist on the steering wheel until my palms stung, willing that memory to surface in full. I fished in the console for my phone and scrolled past contacts until I found the email address I'd saved days ago, a local appraiser's page I'd bookmarked when I first suspected something was off. I pulled into a shaded parking spot by the courthouse, its pillars looming like silent judges. My heart thundered as I unlocked my phone and tapped out a message. I need info on recent sapphire brooch sales. Call me. I hit send before second-guessing myself. The reply came almost instantly, meet me at the shop in an hour. No name signed it, just the promise of answers. I sat back, staring at the courthouse steps. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I brushed a hand over my face, smearing sleep from my eyes, and reminded myself to breathe. Each inhale was a tether to sanity, each exhale a release of fear. I looked down at the brooch's empty box in my lap, and my fingers closed around its velvet lining as though I could will it to reveal its secrets. An hour later I stood outside a narrow storefront painted faded blue. A hand-lettered sign read, Rights Appraisals, and a battered welcome mat sagged underfoot. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed inside, and the air smelled of varnish and antique wood. Behind the counter stood a man in a rumpled vest, glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked up and offered me a nod, as if he'd been expecting me. "Ms. Dawson?" he asked, voice low. I swallowed. Yes, I said, trying to sound calm. I'm looking for information about a sapphire brooch, sold recently. Family heirloom. His eyes flicked to the empty box I held, then back to my face. He motioned to a worn leather chair. Sit, he said. I think we have a record. My heart skipped. I crossed the floor and lowered myself into the chair, hands shaking as I placed the box on the counter between us. The river of my story had carried me here, into the currents of other people's world. Now I had to navigate their depths to reclaim what was mine. That morning, I woke to a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of shallow breathing could soothe. I peeled myself out of bed, my limbs stiff, my jaw locked from clenching overnight, and trudged down the hallway. The house still smelled of last night's soup and old pine, but every corner felt charged, like electricity humming beneath the wallpaper. I carried my journal in one hand and the velvet-lined box in the other, the brooch safe inside its dark cradle. In the living room, I set the journal and box on the coffee table and sank onto the edge of the couch. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the box. My pulse thudded in my temples, I could almost taste the betrayal in the stale air. I flipped open the journal to the page where I'd tucked the proofs, two small pieces of evidence that felt heavier than any brick. I pulled out the Polaroid first. The edges were curling, the image grainy, but I recognized every detail: Emma's slender hand, her wrist bare where she'd slipped off her favorite bracelet, the velvet box hinge yawning open. I pressed my fingertip against the glossy surface, and the memory of that moment pulsed through me like a shock. My chest contracted, and I closed my eyes, swallowing against the lump that made my throat raw. Proof 1, a crumpled Polaroid showing Emma's hand clutching the open, empty velvet box, her nails chipped, that same bracelet slipping half off her wrist. I tucked the Polaroid back between the pages and pulled out the printed screenshot next. 2 lines of text glowed on the page. Sold it today. Needed every cent. Please don't tell Sophia. Understood. Her secret's safe. Pick up tomorrow. My breath hitched. I pressed my palm to my mouth, feeling it tremble against my lips. My fingers curled into the paper as though I could crush the words into oblivion. The rawness of my mother's confession, trading our history for money, cut deeper than any blade. My vision blurred, and I blinked until the letters refocused. Proof 2, a screenshot of text messages between my mother and the buyer, confirming the sale of our heirloom brooch and the plea to keep it secret from me. I closed the journal and hugged it to my chest, the proofs pressing into my sternum. My body coiled with grief and rage, like scales tightening around my heart. I forced myself to breathe, in, out, in, out. But my breaths came shallow, each exhale a whispered plea for relief. I rose and crossed to the bulletin board I'd cleared that week. Using push pins, I affixed the Polaroid on the left and the screenshot on the right, framing them with red yarn that glowed like veins against the cork. The yarn's taut lines felt like we were connected by threads of deceit, impossible to ignore. I stepped back, the room tilting. My knees threatened to buckle, so I placed a hand on the arm of the couch, gripping it until my knuckles whitened. My skin felt too tight, every nerve ending alive with betrayal's electric sting. I heard, somewhere behind me, the faint creak of floorboards. Emma, I thought, coming to find me. But I didn't look back. Not yet. Instead, I sank down in my desk chair, my back rigid against the faux leather. I stared at the pictures, 2 moments frozen in time that unraveled my childhood. I imagined confronting them, watching Mom's face go ashen, Emma's eyes filling with tears, their bodies shrinking under the weight of what they'd done. The fantasy galvanized something in me, a raw, focused hunger for justice, or maybe just for recognition of my pain. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a dull vibration that rattled through the journal on my lap. I ignored it, but my heart pounded wondering who it was. Mara checking in? Emma trying to apologize again? I shoved the phone aside. I didn't want empty words, I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted them to feel the fissure they'd carved in my world. I pressed my hands to my forehead, massaging the tight knot there. My breath shuddered, hot and ragged. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled, warm tracks across my cheeks. I let them fall, blotting my sleeves, until the sobs that followed felt less like grief and more like release. When the storm inside me subsided into a low tremor, I wiped my eyes and stood. The proofs on the board glared back at me, accusing and undeniable. I traced the red yarn with a careful fingertip, following each line until I reached the empty box on the coffee table. I lifted it, the velvet cool beneath my palm, and closed it with a snap that echoed in the silent room. I slid the box into my backpack, unzipping the front pocket to tuck in the Polaroid and the printout. They'd come with me, the evidence fueling my next steps, whether that meant revenge or reckoning. My shoulders squared, and I drew a slow, steady breath. The ache in my chest had shifted shape. It was no longer just pain but purpose. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Emma, "Meet me tonight. We need to face this." My thumb hovered over send, my resolve flickered, but then I pressed it. The message shot off into the void of our fractured relationship, carrying every ounce of hurt and hope I'd mustered. I slung my backpack over one shoulder, feeling lighter somehow, as if acknowledging the proofs had freed me to move. I stepped into the hallway, the weight of betrayal tucked inside my bag and a fierce determination thrumming in my veins. Tonight, I would make them look at the truth on that board, and they would understand that some bonds, once broken, demanded more than apologies to mend. My heart was still pounding when I stepped into the old barn where Emma said she'd meet me. The wooden door sagged on its hinges, and the air smelled of hay and dust, comforting and sharp all at once. I carried my backpack like armor, every strap digging into my shoulders reminding me of the weight I'd chosen to bear. In the dim light, I saw Emma leaning against a weathered stall door, arms crossed, shoulders hunched. Her eyes flicked up when I entered, and for a moment she looked more fragile than the barn itself. I set my bag on a hay bale and fumbled with the buckle, pretending I was there to grab something else. "Hey," I said, voice catching like I wasn't used to talking again. She nodded, gaze fixed on the ground. The silence stretched until I cleared my throat. "Did you get my text?" She inhaled sharply and lifted her chin. "Yeah. I've been thinking." Her voice was small, raw. I nodded, trying to appear calm. My limbs still trembled, though I was standing perfectly still. I reminded myself to breathe, slowly, evenly. I pulled out my journal and set it on the bale. The pages rustled as I opened to the entry where I'd listed what I needed from her: honesty, apology, and a plan. I tapped the words with a fingertip. "I needed you to see these," I said, though I didn't want to revisit them. To understand why I couldn't just brush it off. My throat tightened. Emma's eyes glistened in the faint light. She took a step forward until we were only a few feet apart. "I know," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her words hovered between us. I forced my jaw to unclench. "Sorry doesn't fix what happened," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "But it's a start." She nodded, and I saw her shoulders tremble. "I want to try," she said. "I want to make this right if you'll let me." I studied her face, the slight tilt of her head, the way her fingers twisted the cuff of her sleeve. She looked hopeful and terrified at once. I closed my journal and stashed it back in my bag. "I don't know what right looks like," I admitted. My chest felt tight, words tasting honest and vulnerable. "I need you to show me you understand why I hurt so much." My gaze flicked to the dark corner where moonlight spilled in through a cracked window, dust motes dancing like memories. Emma swallowed and took a breath that shook her whole frame. "Tell me what I can do." Her voice cracked. I felt that old tide of guilt and anger wash over me, the barn's musty air pressed against my skin. I reached into my pocket and hesitated, then pulled out the velvet case. "Start here," I said, holding it out. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes and touched the box as if it were fragile glass. "I'll protect it," she vowed. "I'll keep it safe and never make decisions without you again." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she leaned forward to drop her forehead against the case. I watched her cry for a moment, struck by the rawness of it. I closed my eyes against the sting of tears that weren't mine, then inhaled deeply. I want you to wear it, I said quietly. Share it with me, rather than hiding it. Let it remind both of us that our history belongs to us together. Her head snapped up, mouth parted. You mean, you'll let me? She whispered. I nodded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. If we're moving forward, I need to trust you with it. I reached out, guiding her hand to the latch. Her fingers brushed mine, and I felt a jolt, something fragile and hopeful in the touch. She opened the box carefully, revealing the sapphire glinting faintly in the barn's dim glow. She lifted it and let it settle against her palm. It's more beautiful than I remembered, she breathed. She closed her eyes, pressing the brooch to her heart. I watched her, the barn's shadows shifting across her face. In that moment, I understood that this was our first step back toward each other, messy, uncertain, but real. A sudden breeze stirred through a crack in the door, sending a swirl of dust across the floor. I blinked, reminded that time would keep moving whether we healed or not. Emma looked up, eyes brimming, and offered me the case. Your turn, she said. I took the box, feeling its weight settle in my hands like a promise. I lifted it to my chest, heart pounding in unison with hers. Outside, crickets stirred, their song rising in the night. The barn felt alive with possibility, every shadow a testament to where we'd been and where we could go. I nodded at Emma, voice soft but sure. Together, I said. She stepped closer, and we stood side by side, sharing the brooch between us. The river of our story had split us apart, but here, in the dust and moonlight of this old barn, we were finding our way back to the same current, hand in hand, carrying our legacy forward together. I didn't sleep much after the barn. My mind was buzzing with Emma's tears and the weight of that sapphire in my palm. When dawn crept in through my window, I rolled out of bed and found myself back at the riverbank, my thoughts as restless as the current. The water glinted under a pale sky, and I traced its flow, imagining it carrying away the last threads of betrayal. But I also felt something unfamiliar, a quiet tether to what came next. I trudged down to the water's edge, boots sinking into cool mud. The velvet case lay in my jacket pocket, its shape a constant reminder of both what was broken and what we'd begun to stitch back together. I knelt on one knee and set the case on a flat stone. Emma had asked if she could wear the brooch on her sweater tomorrow, like a gesture of trust. I'd agreed, though my chest tightened at the thought. Giving it back felt both right and terrifying. I unlatched the case and lifted the brooch, holding it by its filigree. The sapphire caught the soft light, winking like a secret. My fingers trembled, and I pressed it against my heart, feeling its cold edge warm slightly against my skin. I inhaled, tasting river air, and exhaled slow. I knew this moment was more than jewelry, it was a promise that our history could survive our mistakes. A breeze rustled through the reeds, and I heard distant birds calling. I pictured Grandma's gentle laugh echoing in these same fields, her stories of resilience carried on the wind. And then I thought of Mom, fragile but fighting, still tethered to life by nothing more than her own stubborn will. I slipped the brooch back into its case and tucked it in my pocket, resolve settling in my bones. That same morning, I met Emma at the old linden tree near the edge of town. Its branches arched overhead like a silent guardian, leaves whispering in a breeze that felt cleansing. She arrived clutching her sweater, eyes red but bright. I offered her the case without a word, and she opened it with reverent fingers. She pinned the brooch just above her heart, and for a heartbeat I forgot the pain it symbolized. She turned so the light caught the sapphire, and she smiled, tentative, hopeful. I returned the smile, feeling the first real warmth in my chest all week. We didn't talk much as we walked, letting the river's hush guide us. The path wound through tall grass and wildflowers, goldenrod and Queen Anne's lace dancing at the edges. Every so often, she'd touch the brooch and glance at me, as if checking that it was still ours. I nodded each time, and she relaxed a little more. Somewhere along the way, we stumbled onto a fallen log overlooking a calm stretch of water. We sat side by side, knees nearly touching. Emma's hand found mine, fingers interlacing. I want to help with Mom, she said softly. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor beneath. I'll drive her to appointments, help with bills, whatever it takes. I turned to her, surprise and gratitude mingling in my chest. I'd like that, I said, voice catching. I don't want you to do it out of guilt. She squeezed my hand. I need it. We need each other. We sat for a long while, watching the river glide past rocks and fallen branches. I thought of how easy it would be to let anger steer me, how revenge once felt like the only way to claim power. But here, in the hush of water and sky, I felt a different current, one that urged forgiveness as its own kind of strength. I closed my eyes, letting the sun's warmth settle over me like a benediction. When we finally stood to leave, Emma brushed a strand of hair from her face. Let's take Mom out tonight. Dinner together, no talk of brooches or bills. Just us. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I said, a slow smile easing onto my face. Just us. Back at home, I found Mom in the kitchen, humming as she washed dishes, her favorite melody from long ago. She looked up when we walked in, the brooch's sparkle catching her eye when she glanced at Emma. Her face softened, and she set down a plate. That's beautiful, she said, voice wavering with emotion. Emma stood a little straighter, as though the brooch had draped a small crown across her sweater. We moved around the kitchen, chopping veggies and stirring soup, the simple rhythm of cooking weaving us back together. Mom offered me an apron, and I tied it around my waist, feeling the fabric's familiar weight. Emma poured wine into 3 glasses, tentative but determined. We raised our glasses in a quiet toast, to family, to memory, to healing. I looked at their faces, Mom's lines softened, Emma's eyes shining, and I realized that this was the real act of revenge against betrayal, not punishment, but reclaiming our love from its dark undercurrent. As the scent of simmering soup and fresh bread filled the air, I felt the river of our story widen once more, carrying us toward a new horizon, one we would face together, with sapphire, forgiveness, and hope guiding our way. The next morning, I woke to the steady beep of the heart monitor, a sound I never imagined would become part of our story. The hospital room felt both sterile and familiar, like we'd been here before in nightmares I tried to forget. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, stripe painting the pale walls. Mom lay in the bed, her face slack with exhaustion, and 4-line tracing her arm like a fragile lifeline. Emma sat in a stiff chair beside her, shoulders hunched as if she could cradle Mom back to strength. I stepped quietly through the doorway, my backpack slung over one shoulder, the velvet case tucked inside. My throat was so tight I could barely speak. Emma looked up, surprised, and gave me a small, grateful nod. I crossed to the bedside and slipped into the chair on Mom's other side, resting my hand gently over hers. Her skin was cool, and I swallowed hard, the memory of that first betrayal echoing in my chest. A nurse arrived with a clipboard and a soft knock. She checked Mom's vitals and spoke quietly about cholesterol levels, medication adjustments, promises of follow-up appointments. The words blurred past me. I focused on Mom's breathing, rising and falling like our first lullabies. When the nurse left, I drew a slow breath. How are you feeling? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mom's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she looked confused, then recognition dawned. She tried to smile, but it faltered. Better now, she said, her throat raspy. Thank you for coming. I closed my eyes against the flood of emotion. I wouldn't be anywhere else, I said. Emma leaned forward and kissed Mom's forehead, her tears soft and steady. I reached into my backpack and drew out the brooch's velvet case. We brought this, I said, setting it gently on the bedside table. Mom's eyes widened, and Emma's hands trembled as she opened the case. The sapphire brooch lay nestled in black velvet, filigree glinting under the fluorescent light. Mom cracked a smile, weak but real. It's beautiful, she whispered. I realized then how much I'd missed seeing that glaze of pride in her eyes. Emma lifted the brooch and turned it over in her fingers, as if tracing every ridge unlocked some buried memory. I want you to have it back, she said, voice small. It belongs to all of us. Mom reached out a trembling hand. It always did, she said. Her gaze flicked to me, waiting. I nodded and closed my eyes for a heartbeat, letting the ache and relief settle side by side. When I dared to look again, I saw how this small piece of silver bridged the gap between us, the fracture of betrayal beginning to mend. We spent the morning talking. Mom apologized for hiding the truth, her voice cracking as she explained how fear had shadowed every step of her treatment. Emma confessed how guilt had nearly broken her spirit. I listened, keeping my own anger tucked away. Each confession was a thread weaving us back together. By midday, the doctor returned to discharge Mom with a new medication plan and referrals for heart-healthy nutrition classes. He outlined restrictions: no heavy lifting, plenty of rest, gentle walks. We promised to drive her back and forth, to share responsibilities. Outside the room, I slipped the brooch into my pocket, its weight warm against my hip, a reminder of our promise: honesty first, always. In the elevator, Emma gripped my arm. "Thank you," she said, voice muffled by tears. I squeezed her hand. "We did this together," I replied. We stepped into the hospital lobby, Mom between us, leaning on a walker. I felt a surge of protectiveness, not born of betrayal but of love reclaimed. The drive home felt different, softer. We kept the windows down, letting spring air swirl through the car. Birds trilled overhead, and I watched Mom's hair whip around her face as she smiled, sunlight dancing in her eyes. Emma glanced at me in the rearview mirror and offered a shaky grin. My heart fluttered with cautious hope. That evening, we gathered in the kitchen again, not out of necessity but choice. I set the brooch on the counter where all could see it, a beacon of our renewed bond. We cooked together, chopped vegetables, stirred sauce, set the table with laughter punctuating our steps. No secrets between us, only the shared rhythm of family. As dusk fell and we sat down to dinner, I caught Mom's eye and Emma's, two women I had once wanted to punish. Now they were my allies, weathered but steadfast. I raised my glass of iced tea. "To us," I said, voice firm with promise. They clinked their glasses against mine. In that moment, I felt the river of our story shift again, from betrayal's turbulent rapids into calmer currents of healing. The sapphire brooch shimmered nearby, its sapphire heart echoing ours, scarred but shining, carrying us forward on a path we would navigate together. The next morning, sunlight poured through the lace curtains, painting golden patterns on the floorboards. I lay motionless for a moment, listening to the faint hum of traffic beyond the oaks and to the distant call of mourning doves. The house felt peaceful, too peaceful, and I realized I hadn't woken with a racing pulse or the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. Instead, there was a quiet, cautious optimism that surprised me. I slid out of bed and padded down the hallway in socks, eyes still hazy. In the kitchen, Mom was at the counter, rifling through a stack of medical bills and insurance statements. Emma sat at the table with her laptop open, fingers flying over the keys. They both looked up when I entered, stockings of apprehension threading through their smiles. "Coffee?" Mom asked, cradling a mug like a lifeline. I nodded and poured myself a cup, savoring the warmth. The steam curled beneath my nose, and for a moment the world felt simple again. Emma closed her laptop. "I've been going through our finances," she admitted. "There's a balance due on Mom's treatment, less than we thought, but still too much for us right now." She paused, biting her lip. "I'm looking into a payment plan." I leaned against the counter, wrapping both hands around my mug. My throat tightened with old resentment, years of trusting them to protect me, of never suspecting that money could come between us. But I took a breath and steadied my voice. "Thank you for doing that," I said. "But let's make decisions together from now on. No more hiding receipts." Emma's shoulders eased. "Agreed." Mom lifted a bill and tucked it next to Emma's laptop. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this," she whispered. "I know I broke your trust." Her eyes glistened. I met her gaze, and I saw the fragility beneath her guilt. I set my mug down and reached out to touch her arm. "We'll get through this," I promised, "as a family." After breakfast, toast and scrambled eggs, we decided to tackle the bills as a team. We spread statements across the table, crossed names off lists, and emailed the hospital's billing department for a clearer breakdown. Despite the somber topic, there was laughter when Emma discovered a typo in one statement, an $800 charge listed as sock therapy instead of shock therapy. Our shared amusement felt like a salve. By late afternoon, we had a plan, a modest payment schedule, community assistance programs for supplemental support, and a shared spreadsheet to track every dollar. The brooch lay in its case on the windowsill, catching stray beams of light like a silent guardian of our collaboration. Whenever tension threatened to sneak back in, a glance at that small sapphire reminded us of our promise to stay open and honest. With the bills under control, I suggested a change of scenery. "Let's go for a drive," I said. The three of us climbed into my car and wound our way through country lanes, the emerald fields rolling beside us like an invitation to freedom. We stopped at a roadside stand and bought fresh peaches still warm from the sun. On the tailgate of Emma's truck, we sat side by side, biting into the fruit's sticky sweetness. Talking about Grandma felt right in that moment. We shared memories, how she tapped the fork to get our attention at the dinner table, the lullabies she hummed in the evenings, the way she clasped her brooch each time she said, "Family keeps me safe." Tears welled, then laughter broke through as Emma tried to imitate Grandma's old dancing jig. I filmed her on my phone, and Mom watched, tears tracing lines of joy and nostalgia down her cheeks. As dusk settled and the sky turned rose and lavender, we agreed to stop by the river on our way home, a ritual born of necessity now tinged with hope. The current was gentle at this hour, ribbons of moonlight threading across the water. I retrieved the brooch and passed it to Emma, who pinned it above her heart. "For Grandma," she said softly. Then she handed the case to Mom, who cradled it like a precious secret shared at last. Finally, I held it, feeling the cool metal warm in my palm. "For us," I whispered. We watched the river together, three silhouettes etched against its gentle flow. No words were needed, the night air carried our unspoken vow, to honor the past, protect the present, and face the future as one. As we walked back to the car, the current beyond seemed to murmur that our story, hurtful and beautiful, would continue to flow, carrying us toward whatever lay around the next bend. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window in soft, honeyed beams as I poured coffee into three mismatched mugs. The house felt different now, warmer, somehow, as though the promise we'd made by the river had seeped into its walls. Emma and Mom sat at the table, their heads bent over the bill spreadsheet we'd updated the night before, but I knew better than to let work consume us again. Today had to be about something else. I set the mugs down, the steam curling between us like an invitation. "Let's take a break," I said, voice gentle. Emma looked up, surprise and relief mingling in her eyes. Mom offered me a tired smile. "That sounds nice," she said, fingers brushing the brooch pinned at her collar. It glinted in the morning light, reminding each of us that we'd come this far, together. We mapped out a simple plan, a picnic at the old apple orchard on the outskirts of town, followed by a walk through the meadow where Grandma used to pick wildflowers. No talk of treatment schedules or bank statements, just time to breathe, to remember why we'd fought so hard to reclaim more than a piece of jewelry. The drive out was quiet at first, the car filled with the hum of tires on pavement. Emma cranked up one of Grandma's favorite old country songs, and soon Mom was tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. By the time we turned onto the gravel road leading to the orchard, laughter had slipped in between us like sunlight through clouds. The orchard was a riot of green and gold, trees heavy with ripening fruit that smelled of summer and promise. We spread our blanket beneath one of the gnarled trunks Grandma used to call the storyteller's tree. The brambles and bees hummed around us as we unpacked sandwiches and lemonade. Emma passed out slices of apple I'd packed, their crisp sweetness echoing every bite with memory. I watched Mom take a bite and close her eyes, her lips curving in a smile I hadn't seen in months. We lingered until the sun climbed overhead and the orchard's shadow shrank. As we packed away the picnic, Emma slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you," she whispered, voice small. For giving me a chance." I squeezed her hand. We all needed this, I said. To remember there's more to life than our mistakes. We followed the dirt path to the meadow, tall grass brushing our legs and sending ripples like waves. Wildflowers danced in clusters, Queen Anne's lace, daisies, cornflowers, just as Grandma had described. Emma bent to pick a handful, weaving them into a loose crown. She placed it atop my head, and I laughed so freely I barely recognized myself. Mom joined in, the three of us standing in a circle, each crowned in blossoms. But even joy has its shadows. As we turned to stroll toward the fence at the meadow's edge, Mom paused, her hand flying to her chest. Her breath hitched, and she looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. I feel dizzy, she whispered. The crown of flowers slipped from my head as I reached for her, panic pricking at my skin. Emma knelt beside her, supporting Mom's weight. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice trembling. Mom's color drained, cheeks paling. I knelt too, scanning her face for answers that wouldn't come. She pressed her free hand to her chest. "My heart," she gasped, words tight as a noose. I fumbled for my phone, dialing the clinic with a shaking thumb. Emma pressed a cool handkerchief to Mom's forehead, her own tears falling unchecked. The world narrowed to Mom's labored breathing and the distant cry of meadowlarks overhead. Minutes, or lifetimes, later, Emma held the phone to her ear, murmuring the address. I kept my arm around Mom, the flower crown now forgotten on the grass. When the car's engine finally turned over, I slammed the door shut and pulled Mom's seatbelt across her frail frame. Emma rode shotgun, phone clutched to her ear as the gravel turned to pavement. Every bump sent a jolt through Mom's body, and I worried each moment might be her last. My heart pounded, and the brooch's weight in my jacket pocket felt like lead. As the clinic's doors came into view, I braked sharply, swinging the car into the parking lot. Emma dashed ahead to fetch a wheelchair. I scooped Mom into my arms, careful not to jostle her, and carried her inside. The waiting room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I laid her on the chair and took her hand. Emma returned, breathless and apologetic. We sat together, three hearts entwined in fear and love. In that stark room, the orchard's laughter and the meadow's flowers felt worlds away. But we had each other still, ready to face this new crisis as we had the last. The current of our story would surge again, but I resolved that we would navigate it side by side, the sapphire brooch a promise against the darkness. That afternoon, we sat in the cramped exam room, Mom slumped in the plastic chair, her hand pressed to her chest as she tried to catch her breath. The pale linoleum floor reflected the harsh fluorescent lights overhead, and I could feel every tick of the wall clock like a drumbeat in my skull. Emma hovered beside me, her fingers twisting the fabric of my sleeve, eyes wide and red-rimmed. The nurse returned with a portable EKG machine and snapped the sticky pads onto Mom's chest. Each pad sent a little shock through her skin, and she flinched, her breath hitching. My stomach clenched into knots. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my water bottle. I tasted the acrid tang of fear on my tongue. Mom's eyes flicked around the room, as if searching for something familiar. She found mine and offered a weak smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm okay," she whispered, voice thin and trembling. But I could hear the tremor in every syllable. I brushed her hair back and forced a smile I didn't feel. "We're here," I said, voice catching. "You're going to be okay." The doctor hurried in a moment later, stethoscope bouncing against his chest. He nodded at the nurse, who peeled off the EKG leads and handed him the printout. He studied the jagged lines and pursed his lips, the gravity settling into his eyes like a weight. My heart pounded. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, as if I could hold on to Mom's life by sheer will. He cleared his throat. "Your mother experienced another angina episode," he said softly. "Her arteries are still too narrow, and her heart isn't getting enough oxygen." My breath hitched. Narrow arteries, that sounded final. He watched me for a reaction, then continued, "We need to admit her for monitoring and possibly schedule a catheterization. It's a delicate procedure, but it could improve blood flow." Emma's hand shot to her mouth, and I gripped her other hand to keep her from collapsing. Mom blinked, her gaze flicking between us and the doctor. "A catheterization," she echoed, voice small. I wanted to tell her it would be all right, that we'd gotten this far and we'd see it through. But I couldn't find the words, my chest felt too tight. The doctor offered a gentle nod. "It's the next step. We'll take good care of her." He stepped back and scribbled notes on his clipboard. My pulse thundered in my ears as he walked away. Minutes stretched. I stood and knelt beside Mom, pressing my forehead to her shoulder. She smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender soap. "I'm here," I murmured, brushing her cheek. Emma wrapped an arm around my waist, her shoulders shaking. We sat like that for a long moment, three of us tangled together in fear and love. When the nurse returned to wheel Mom toward the ward, I hovered at her elbow. The corridor stretched out, tiled floors gleaming under the bright lights. Mom steadied herself with a hand on the gurney. Her face was pale, lips pressed thin. I could see the effort it took for her to breathe. I grabbed her hand. "I love you," I said, voice catching. She squeezed mine back, and I felt her grip falter as the gurney rolled forward. Emma followed close behind, tears slipping free. I watched until the door's frosted glass slid shut and left us in the empty hallway, echoes of wheels clicking on tiles. Emma leaned against the wall, her knees buckling. I caught her, guiding her to sit on the floor. She buried her face in her hands, sobs rattling her frame. I cradled her head against my shoulder, breathing slow to ground us both. "She's in good hands," I whispered. "We'll be okay." After what felt like forever, a nurse returned with instructions, visiting hours, paperwork to sign, phone numbers for updates. I filled out the forms with a trembling pen, each line a promise to stay by Mom's side. Emma held the forms for me, her thumb brushing my hand in quiet support. Once the paperwork was done, we settled into the waiting area outside the ICU. Rows of plastic chairs lined the walls, and a lone vending machine hummed in the corner. I perched on the edge of a chair, journal in my lap, unable to write despite the rush of emotion begging for release. Emma sat on the floor, legs folded, head resting on my knee. We were silent, the weight of what could come pressing down. Outside the window, the sky was fading to charcoal and violet, evening's hush settling over the world. I closed my eyes and pictured Grandma's brooch gleaming in the lamplight, a reminder of resilience passed down through generations. We'd made it this far, through betrayal, anger, and fragile forgiveness, and we weren't about to give up now. I reached into my bag and felt the velvet case's familiar shape. I slipped it out and opened it, the sapphire glinting softly in the dim light of the waiting room. Emma looked up, her tears shining bright. I held it out to her, and she took it with trembling fingers, pressing it to her heart as if drawing strength from its weight. We sat like that, sharing the brooch between us, until the intercom crackled to life with a nurse's voice calling us back. Emma rose, case clutched to her chest, and I set my jaw, steeling myself for whatever came next. Together, we followed the corridor's harsh lights toward Mom's room, ready to face the next bend in this river of our story. I pushed open the heavy double doors marked ICU and felt the cold hush wash over us. Emma clung to the velvet case in her hands like a lifeline. Rows of beds lay behind glass partitions, each one humming with machines that kept people tethered to life. A nurse met us at the threshold, gentle but brisk. "Your mother is stable," she said, voice low. "You can see her now." She led us down a narrow corridor, the floor tiles clicking beneath our shoes. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure the monitors would pick it up. I swallowed hard, brushing a stray hair from my face, and followed Emma to the glass-walled room where Mom lay. She looked small against the crisp white sheets, tubes snaking from her arms and mouth. The ventilator wheezed gently, synchronizing with her breath. Her eyes fluttered under closed lids. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped inside, Emma at my side. The nurse gestured to a chair beside the bed. I settled in, careful not to jostle the four lines. Emma crouched on the other side, fingers brushing Mom's hand. I reached over and tucked the brooch's velvet case into my jacket pocket, too precious to leave on the bedside table. Mom stirred, her eyelids opening to focus on us. A flicker of recognition passed across her face, and she tried to speak, but only a soft sigh emerged. I leaned in close. "Hi, Mom," I whispered. "You're safe." My voice cracked, and I cleared my throat. "We're here." Emma dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, nodding. The ventilator cycled, and Mom's breath steadied. I exhaled, tension draining from my shoulders in a trembling sigh. We spoke to her in hushes, about how brave she'd been, how we'd handled the bills, how much we loved her. Each word felt sacred, suspended in the sterile air. Mom's gaze drifted between us, and I thought I saw tears glisten at the corners of her eyes. Her hand twitched, and Emma squeezed it gently. Time seemed to fold, silent minutes stretching into an eternity of hopes and fears. I watched the heart monitor's steady spikes, each one a small victory. The nurse returned with a clipboard, adjusting a dial on the ventilator. She offered us a sympathetic smile and whispered, "Give her time. She'll pull through." When she left, Emma let out a shaky breath. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice tight. I reached across the bed and folded her into an embrace. "We're here now," I said. "That's what matters." Mom's eyes fluttered closed again. I brushed her hair back from her forehead. The ache in my chest was raw, both grief for how close we'd come to losing her and gratitude that she was still here. I pressed a kiss to Mom's palm. Emma rested her head against the mattress, tears slipping down her cheeks. Hours passed in a blur of whispered reassurances and the beeping of machines. At one point, the ventilator beeped sharply, an alarm. I jolted upright, heart in my throat, as the nurse hurried back. She silenced the alarm with a swift tap, checking Mom's readings. The line on the monitor dipped, then resumed its rhythm. My knees went weak, and I slid into the chair, breath shaking. "I hate this place," Emma murmured, voice thick. "It feels like a waiting room for loss." I nodded, understanding the hollow fear that clung to her. "Me too," I said softly. "But she's stronger than fear." I pressed her hand, and she leaned into me. Late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across Mom's face. I watched her chest rise and fall, each breath a promise of more moments to come. Emma slipped out to fetch coffee, and I was alone with her for a tense minute. I set my palm on her arm, bracing myself against the pain of our earlier betrayal. The brooch in my pocket burned with its weight, a reminder of what we'd fought for and what still needed healing. When Emma returned, she carried 2 cups in shaky hands. We sipped in silence, staring at Mom's peaceful form. My phone buzzed in my lap, a message from Mara, offering dinner when I was ready. I typed back a quick thank you and set it aside. Our world had narrowed to this room, to our mother's fragile recovery. As evening shadows deepened, Mom stirred again, her fingers curling around mine. Emma leaned in, whispering, "You're doing great, Mom." And I added, "We love you." Her eyes opened fully this time, and she offered a small, tired smile. It wasn't the proud beam we knew, but it was enough, proof that her spirit was still fighting. I felt a tremor of hope ripple through me. The road ahead would be long, catheterization, recovery, building trust all over again, but in that moment, I believed we could walk it together. I straightened in my chair, brushing a tear off my cheek. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom's smile widened a fraction, and I whispered, "We've got you." The monitors beeped on steady, punctuating our vow. In the hush of that ICU room, surrounded by tubes and machines, we reclaimed our family's current, steadying its flow with love, forgiveness, and unwavering hope. ChatGPT. That morning, the car's heater felt too warm as I drove us home from the hospital. Mom sat in the passenger seat, bundled under a soft blanket, her face pale but determined. Emma rode shotgun, the velvet case resting on her lap like a talisman. I kept my eyes on the road, wary of every bump that might jolt Mom's fragile frame, my knuckles white around the wheel. We pulled into the driveway of the farmhouse just as late afternoon settled over the cornfields. The porch light was on, its glow a welcome beacon against the growing dusk. I killed the engine and waited, listening to Mom's slow, steady breaths. Emma squeezed my arm. "I think she's okay," she whispered. I nodded without looking at her, then unbuckled my seatbelt and climbed out. Mom moved with surprising strength as I helped her down the car's step. Her hand gripped my elbow, warm and real. I led her up the porch steps, every board creaking underfoot. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and fresh laundry, the small comforts we'd missed during her hospital stay. Emma settled Mom into the love seat by the fireplace and tucked the blanket around her shoulders. I pulled chairs close so we formed a half circle around her. The brooch's velvet case lay on the coffee table, untouched. For now, its presence enough. I turned on the lamp, its soft light filling the room with a gentle glow. Mom's gaze drifted to the case. "It's beautiful," she said, voice husky. Emma didn't wait. She retrieved the brooch and pinned it to Mom's cardigan, right over her heart. The sapphire caught the lamp's glow, scattering tiny rainbows across the nearby wall. "I missed this," Mom whispered, her hand resting over the brooch. She closed her eyes, and I saw a flicker of peace cross her features. For a moment, it felt as though the betrayal and the fear had never happened. But I knew better. "I'm making chicken soup," I said, standing. "It's what you always wanted when you came home sick." Mom smiled, and Emma let out a breath she'd been holding. In the kitchen, I chopped vegetables while Emma set the table. Steam curled from the soup pot, carrying the scent of carrots and thyme. I poured broth into bowls and carried them back to the living room. We ate quietly, the clink of spoons against porcelain the only sound. Halfway through the meal, Mom put down her spoon. "I want to talk," she said, her eyes earnest. I exchanged a glance with Emma, then nodded. I set my own bowl aside, and so did Emma. Mom took a slow breath. "I've been thinking about why I hid the truth," she began. Her voice trembled. "I was terrified, of leaving you girls alone, of being a burden. But I see now that I hurt you even more by keeping secrets." She looked at Emma, then at me. "I want to make amends." My chest tightened. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs. But I listened as Mom outlined small changes, joint decisions on medical care, shared calendars for appointments, weekly family check-ins. Emma added ideas, budgeting apps, a support group for caregivers, even therapy sessions. When Mom finished, the room felt charged, as if we'd cleared the air of something toxic. Emma reached over and took Mom's hand. I closed my eyes, tasting tears I refused to let fall. Instead, I said quietly, "I forgive you, for trying to protect us the only way you knew." My words hung between us, fragile but true. Mom's eyes filled, and she squeezed Emma's hand. I leaned back, the love seat cushioning my weight. The brooch glinted on Mom's sweater, a symbol of our promise to stay open and honest. Later, when the soup bowls were empty, we moved to the porch for fresh air. The night was cool, stars blinking overhead. Mom wrapped her arms around both of us. Emma rested her head on Mom's shoulder. I slipped an arm around Emma's waist, feeling the warmth of family wrap around me. I thought of the journey we'd taken, discovery, betrayal, revenge, healing. The river of our story had carried us through rapids of rage and pain, but now its current felt steady, guiding us toward calm waters. As the porch swing creaked under our weight, I glanced at the velvet case by the door. The brooch inside was safe, but more than that, our family was safe. In that quiet moment, I believed we could navigate whatever twists lay ahead, together. I woke that morning with sunbeams slanting through the curtains and a gentle ache in my muscles from sleeping curled around my grandmother's locket replica. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon rolls, Emma's idea to lighten the mood, so I followed the scent downstairs. Mom sat at the table, the brooch pinned to her blouse, its sapphire glinting like a secret between us. Emma was already halfway through a plate, smiling despite the cranky butterfly in her stomach. "Coffee?" I asked, pouring 3 mugs. Mom nodded, settling the heavy quilt across her knees. Thank you, she said, voice soft. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the clink of spoons and the warm hum of the radio carrying us forward. I watched Mom trace the filigree of her brooch absently, remembering how long it had taken to reclaim this piece of our past. It felt right that today would be the day Dad got to see it again. After breakfast, we piled into the car, Mom on the passenger side, Emma navigating with our shared calendar app open on her phone, and me behind the wheel. The town's main street felt friendly as we rolled past the bakery and the old movie theater where Grandma had taken me as a child. We pulled up outside the little house where Dad lived now, its white clabbered paint chipped but cheerful. Dad appeared at the doorstep before we even knocked, his posture rigid as he took in the three of us. Mom reached out, and he hesitated before pulling her into a gentle hug. Emma and I followed, enveloped in the strange comfort of old routines. We stepped inside, and Dad closed the door behind us, the porch light flickering on like an old friend greeting us home. The living room smelled of sandalwood from a burning candle. Dad sank onto the couch while Mom placed her mug on the coffee table. "It's good to see you," he said, voice husky. "It's good to be back," Mom replied, her hand brushing the brooch. She turned to me and Emma. "We have something to show you." Emma stood and held out the velvet case. Dad's eyebrows rose. He opened it carefully, as though it might shatter in his hands. The brooch lay nestled inside, the same sapphire that had once caught Grandma's laugh and later driven us apart. Dad stared at it, his expression unreadable, then gently lifted it and held it to the light. "It's even more beautiful now," he said, voice breaking. Mom reached for his hand. "I'm sorry for keeping this from you," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting everyone." Dad looked up, eyes glistening. "I missed it, and I missed you," he said. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he placed the brooch back in the case. "Thank you for bringing it home." We spent the next hour catching up. Dad told us about his garden, the neighbor's new baby, the way the light fell across his porch at dusk. Emma relayed her crazy work hours and her plans to redecorate her apartment. I shared the photo journal I'd started, pages filled with snapshots of the brooch in different lights, alongside family moments we'd scraped back together. Later, we decided to take a walk along the creek that edged Dad's property. The water babbled over stones, carrying our footprints downstream. Dad held the brooch in his palm, its weight familiar yet full of new promise. He pinned it temporarily to a branch, adjusting its angle until the sun made the sapphire spark like a beacon. "This was Grandma's favorite spot," he said, voice soft. "She'd sit here for hours, letting the creek tell her its secrets." Mom leaned against me, and Emma looped her arm through mine. We watched the brooch gleam between bark and water, a testament to resilience. I felt the current of our story settle into a gentle rhythm, reminders of betrayal still there, but softened by forgiveness. As we strolled back toward the house, Dad slipped the brooch into my hand. "You keep this safe," he said, "and always remember where it came from." I nodded, pressing it to my heart as if anchoring every hard-won lesson. That evening, we gathered for dinner around Dad's worn oak table, roast chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. No talk of secrets or bills, only laughter as Emma spilled gravy and Mom teased Dad about burning his famous pie last time. I raised my glass of iced tea. "To family," I said, smiling at the brimming faces around me. They raised their glasses in unison. Later, when the house grew quiet and the brooch rested on my bedside table, I realized our river hadn't smoothed out entirely, but its rapids had given way to steady pools of trust and hope. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew we would face whatever currents came next, together, with our legacy pinned safely over our hearts. ChatGPT. I woke before the sun crested the horizon, the house wrapped in that fragile quiet between night and morning. I slipped from bed, every muscle humming with the residue of yesterday's laughter around Dad's oak table. On the bedside table, the brooch lay in its velvet cradle, sapphire glinting in the dim lamplight. My fingers brushed its cool surface, and I felt a tether pull me toward the day. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of coffee grounds and the faint sweetness of overnight oatmeal. Emma was already there, perched on a stool, shoulders hunched over her phone. Her eyes looked tired, and she rubbed one temple as I poured 2 mugs of black coffee. "Rough night?" I asked softly. She sighed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I got laid off," she admitted, voice hollow. "They're cutting positions." The words hit me like cold water. I placed a mug before her and sank onto the bench beside her, scanning her face for the weight behind her admissions. Her jaw tightened, lips pressed thin. "I'm sorry," I said, though the apology felt backward. She didn't need pity. "What happened?" Emma stared at her mug, swirling the dark liquid. "Overstaffed," she said, voice small. "They said it wasn't performance, but..." I wasn't surprised. Her shoulders curled inward, as though she could collapse into herself. I reached out, covering her hand with mine. The warmth of her skin felt like a plea. "We'll figure this out," I promised. "We always do." She blinked at me, vulnerability flickering in her eyes. "I feel like I'm losing it," she whispered. "Mom's bills, Dad's recovery, and now this." Her breath shook, and she closed her eyes against the sting of tears. I stood and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. She trembled against me, and I felt her grief as if it were my own. "Coffee breaks over," I said firmly, stepping back and handing her the mug. "We need breakfast fuel." She let out a shaky laugh and nodded, wiping her eyes. Together, we worked in tandem, chopping fruit, whisking eggs, setting 2 plates for Mom and me. When Mom joined us, shawl around her shoulders and brooch pinned close to her heart, she studied us with concern. "Everything all right?" she asked, voice gentle. Emma forced a smile. "Just work stuff," she said, though her voice cracked. Mom exchanged a look with me, no words needed. I slid a plate in front of Emma and tucked a lock of hair behind Mom's ear before I took my seat. The morning light filtered through the window, painting golden stripes across the tablecloth. We ate in soft quiet, the hum of the coffee maker filling the spaces between our thoughts. After breakfast, I convinced Emma to take a walk with me to clear her head. We wound through the field behind the farmhouse, where goldenrod and Queen Anne's lay swayed in a lazy breeze. Emma paused at the top of a small rise and looked out over the patchwork of cornfields. She swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. Her voice was honest, raw. I stood beside her, the brooch heavy in my pocket, a reminder that we'd reclaimed our family's past, but the future was still unwritten. "You're not alone," I said. "Let's make a plan." She turned to me, eyes bright with both fear and gratitude. Together, we sketched possibilities, temp work to bridge the gap, cutting non-essentials. Maybe I could pick up extra hours at the cafe downtown. Every suggestion was a step forward, a shared promise to shoulder the load. By the time we returned to the house, Mom had brewed fresh coffee and was poring over community bulletin boards for local job fairs. The brooch gleamed on her sweater, a silent witness to our unrest and resolve. We gathered around the kitchen island, notes and calendars spread before us, and I felt that old current carry us, sometimes turbulent, often unpredictable, but always pulling us onward together. That afternoon, I tucked the brooch back into its velvet case and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. It caught stray beams of light, scattering tiny prisms across the room. I realized then that our family's story wasn't just about betrayal and healing, it was about resilience in the face of whatever came next. Financial hardship, illness, fear, they were rapids we'd navigate as one. When evening fell, we sat by the hearth, Mom knitting, Emma updating her resume on my laptop, me sipping chamomile tea. Laughter bubbled up when Emma recalled a ridiculous interview question from last week. The warmth in the room felt like a promise. We'd face tomorrow's uncertainties the same way we'd conquered our deepest wounds, hand in hand, tethered by trust, and guided by the glint of that sapphire promise on the mantel behind us. The next morning, fog curled around the farmhouse like a whispered promise, and I woke with the thrill of possibility knotting in my chest. Emma was already at her desk in the corner of the living room, computer screen casting pale blue light over her determined face. Mom's kettle whistled in the kitchen, and I joined her to pour 3 mugs of tea, peppermint for me, chamomile for Mom, and strong English breakfast for Emma. Over steaming cups, we reviewed Emma's schedule for the week, 2 interviews lined up, a networking breakfast at the community center, and a phone call with a temp agency. The brooch lay between us on the table, glinting like a silent talisman of how far we'd come. Every time our gazes brushed it, we felt our shared history steadying our nerves. By late morning, I drove Emma into town. Sunlight filtered through bare branches as we passed the school where I'd taught summers ago. She gripped the satchel embossed with her initials, shoulders squared. "Thank you for believing in me," she said, voice tight. I smiled and squeezed her hand. "You've got this." She stepped onto the sidewalk and turned, offering me one last grin before the door to the recruitment office closed behind her. I spent the next hour at the town library, thumbing through old newspapers for any mention of our grandmother's Parisian wedding, clues to the brooch's origin. I found only a brief social column: Dawson family celebrates spring nuptials with elegant soiree, dated decades ago, no details of jewelry. My chest tightened. Even now, the brooch's provenance remained partly shrouded in time, a delicate mystery between us. When Emma reappeared, her stride was brisk, eyes bright. "It went well," she announced, cheeks flushed. "They liked my portfolio, and the manager said they'd be in touch." My heart lifted. "That's amazing." We climbed back into the car, and I suggested a detour to the old theater, where a vintage film festival was starting that afternoon, a treat Grandma would have adored. Inside the dusty foyer, velvet curtains framed a screen flickering with black and white reels. We settled into plush seats, the brooch safely tucked beneath Emma's sweater. The film's hero carried a secret locket that guided him home, and every time it appeared on screen, Emma and I exchanged a glance, an unspoken nod to our own heirloom. In that half-light, with music swelling around us, I felt our river of moments converge: betrayal, revenge, reconciliation, and now, quiet joy. After the film, we walked back under lantern glow toward the car. Emma slipped her arm through mine. "Mom's working on a new project," she said. "She wants to host a small fundraiser for the clinic that helped her." I squeezed her hand. "That's wonderful." A warmth bloomed in my chest, pride in both of them for turning hardship into compassion. The next day, Mom set up a small bake sale on the front porch, with proceeds to the cardiac ward. We baked blueberry muffins, oatmeal cookies, and Grandma's honey sweet bread. Neighbors trickled by, drawn by the brooch pinned to Mom's cardigan, a symbol of our family's journey. Each person who paid left with a homemade treat and words of encouragement. I overheard one friend say, "You've built something beautiful out of pain." My throat clenched at how true that was. That evening, we sat around the kitchen island, counting the day's earnings and planning the next bake. The mood was bright, the hush of heartbreak had given way to this steady buzz of life. I glanced at the velvet case on the mantel and thought of the river we'd navigated, its currents shifting with every new challenge. But beneath the warmth lay a quiet knot of unease I couldn't fully name. In Mom's lingering exhaustion, in the way Emma sometimes stared at the brooch and whispered to herself, I sensed that our story still held secrets, subtle undercurrents pulling at us. I resolved to ask the questions I'd shelved too long, about those hospital bills that never quite balanced, about the whispers I'd heard late at night near Mom's desk. I'd listened to her fear when she thought I wasn't in earshot, the way she once muttered a single name in her sleep, something I'd never brought up. As we wiped flour off our hands and stacked empty mixing bowls, I realized that the final turn in our river was coming. We stood side by side, daughter, sister, mother, bound by sapphire and trust. The next bend would reveal the truths still hidden in its depths. And whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, the brooch between us a guiding light through every shadow. I found them in the kitchen just as dawn was tinting the sky pale rose. Mom stood at the counter, her shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the brooch's velvet box. Emma hovered beside her, fingers drumming the tabletop, both of them silent as ghosts. My heart pounded. This was the moment I'd skirted around for weeks, the final bend in our river. I cleared my throat. "Can we talk?" My voice echoed in the hush. Mom startled, then closed the case with a soft snap. Emma glanced at me, hopeful and terrified. Mom drew a shaky breath. "There's something I never told you," she began, voice quivering. I braced myself at the island's edge, arms folded, knees aching from restless nights. "When I started getting those bills, it wasn't just your treatment. Your father had an accident years ago, remember?" She paused as Emma's face drained of color. "He left us with debts, medical costs, car repairs, legal fees. I tried to handle it quietly, but the interest grew, and the creditors, they started calling at all hours. I was desperate." Emma's lip trembled. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, voice small. Mom's gaze dropped. "I thought I could manage, that I'd figure it out before it hurt any of you. I asked my sister to help, but she was struggling too. She'd lost her job, had mounting rent. We agreed to sell the brooch, split the money to cover both our debts. I convinced myself it was for your safety, but it was for ours, too." Silence pressed in. I swallowed hard, tasting betrayal and relief. My fingers itched to touch the velvet but stayed folded. "So you both risked everything for that?" I whispered. "You risked our history." Mom's eyes glistened. "I know now it was my failure to ask for help. I should have told you. There were nights I lay awake, imagining life without you girls. I thought selling the brooch was protecting you, but it was cowardice." Emma stepped forward, voice trembling. "I'm sorry I didn't stop you." She reached out, hand hovering over the case. I was scared, too. I closed my eyes, the memory of that first Polaroid flashing, Emma's hand, velvet open, hospital badge in the corner. Mom's pleading eyes as she whispered through tears. The fury I'd carried felt raw in my throat, but now I understood the full current behind their actions: desperation, fear, twisted guilt. My breath hitched. "You both lied to me," I said, not angry but broken. "You thought hiding it was love." I forced my voice steady. "I felt betrayed because you never gave me a chance to help." Mom's shoulders shook. "I was so ashamed," she confided. "I didn't want you to worry." Emma's tears fell. "I wanted to protect you, sophomore. I thought I was shielding you. I was wrong." I exhaled, grief and compassion flooding me in equal measure. The brooch case sat between us like a fragile bridge. I stepped forward and placed my hand over theirs on top of it. "We all made mistakes," I said softly. "I took revenge because I felt powerless. But this," I touched the velvet, "this belongs to all of us. Not as a prize, but as a promise." Mom looked up, hope trembling in her gaze. "Promise?" I nodded. "Promise that we face problems together. That no secret will ever divide us again." I opened the case and retrieved the brooch, holding it out to Mom first. "I want you to wear this now. Let it remind you that you're not alone." She accepted it, pinning it over her heart with trembling fingers. Emma followed, fastening it to her sweater. When she handed the case to me, I tucked it into my pocket, no longer a symbol of pain, but of unity. We stood in the soft glow of morning, 3 generations bound by silver and sapphire. Outside, the birds began to sing, and I felt the river's current surge forward, clearer now, carrying us toward every tomorrow. Together.